Guys, I'm really delighted to welcome to the podcast Jennifer Sey. She is an American author. She's a filmmaker, a business executive, and a retired artistic gymnast. Now, she's also a top executive. She was a top executive at Levi Strauss Company in 1999, rising to brand president until in January 2022, she was asked to resign. And that's what we're going to talk about. By the way, her new book, Levi's Unbuttoned, great title. And you can follow her website, jennifersey.substack.com. Jennifer, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. Here's an article about you, a prominent article in the New York Times. She was a candidate to lead Levi's. Then she started tweeting. It sounds like tweeting proved to be your downfall. Let's start by talking about your career at Levi's. Was it a happy career? Did it just sort of take a sharp turn? Talk a little bit about that, and then we'll come to what happened to you.
Yeah, it did take a pretty sharp turn in March 2020. I started at the company in 1999 as an entry-level marketing assistant. I worked hard and rose through the ranks and became the chief marketing officer in 2013. Held that job for 8 years, which is a really long time to hold that post and be successful in it. Helped lead the brand back from near brink of bankruptcy, honestly, in 2011. I loved the company. I loved the brand. I'd worn it since I was a small child. I loved it there. I built a strong team and friends, and, I felt very much a part of the culture and excelled there. And in 2020, in the fall, I was promoted to brand president. So I oversaw all the product development, all the jeans people wear, the store design, all of it, as well as the marketing at that point. But just a few months before that, in March of 2020, I was very outspoken about school closures and restrictions to children. And so I tweeted about it, but I also wrote op-eds and appeared on news shows. And eventually, after a 2-year conflict, I was told I needed to resign because I was a reputational risk to the company. That wasn't true. Our brand was doing great, recovering from COVID. But essentially, they didn't like what I said. I challenged a key pillar, apparently, of the Democratic Party platform, right? Stay closed until zero COVID. And so I was too dangerous to have around.
Let's probe that a little bit further, because it seems to me that it's not that they had a vaccine mandate and you refused to take it, or they had a mask mandate. What you're saying is that you were fired for your views. You were fired for what you were saying in the public domain, and they claimed that it was hurting the Levi reputation and the Levi brand. Now, let's walk through a little bit more, because I think it's good for people to understand how this kind of thing gets started. Does it start where your immediate supervisor goes, hey, listen, you may want to cool it, or you may want to cut it out, and then you go, no? Let's walk through the process of how this escalated over that 2-year period.
Yeah, sure. And, sort of what they say publicly is different than what they said internally. Internally it was reputational risk. Externally, what they've said is challenging public health restrictions put our employees at risk. But the public health restrictions I challenged had only to do with children. And there are no children that work at Levi, so I'm not sure how it
No child labor. Right.
No child labor. And I challenged primarily public school closures. And it should be noted that my peers were all sending their kids to in-person private school. So the hypocrisy for me just was too glaring. And my own children go to public school. And I was representing the 50,000 public school children in San Francisco, where I used to live. But the way it starts, my boss, who's the CEO, was sort of delayed in coming to me directly. He was big conflict avoidant. He had his team members, my peers, do it. I first got a call from the lead of corporate communication saying people are noticing what you're saying and they don't like it. And I said, so, I'm advocating for children. I have a long history of doing so in the world of athletics. This is really important. Your own children are in school. And she says, but people are upset, employees. And so you have to watch it. And I said, no. I essentially said, no, this is too important to me. Kids' health and well-being is at risk. And she said, hold the line. I kind of didn't know what that meant. And I asked her, are you telling me I have to stop? She said, no, I can't do that. And I said, then I'm not going to. And then for a year and a half after that, I got a call every other week from some peer or employee telling me I needed to stop. And employees, a very small group of angry, punitive employees, were angry and emailing HR. I think it was a tiny group, honestly. I wasn't privy to it. I just knew that it was happening. And then a Twitter mob, relatively small, started calling the ethics hotline to say I was an ethics violation and should be, not sure what ethic I was violating, and should be fired. And so eventually they got sick of it. And in January of 22, my own boss, who throughout this period had engaged and called me every name from, Trumper to racist, eventually he got tired of the noise and he told me I needed to go and they would give me severance of $1 million, which I rejected. Because it would come with a non-disclosure agreement on the terms of my leaving. And I wanted to be able to talk about it to people like you, because the censorship is what has created this problem. If we could have had an open, honest debate about the impact to children, schools would have opened sooner. So I was not going to give up my voice.
I mean, I think this speaks to something obviously in your temperament, because you had a great job. You were perhaps even in line for a bigger job, and you were willing to put it all on the line. Why?
It's such a good question, Dinesh, and it's one I get asked all the time. And when people ask me, my general response is, why aren't you? If you're not willing to kind of stand up for children and speech and freedom, what are you willing to stand up for? And it was a difficult decision. Like I said, I love the company, I love the product, and I was in line to be CEO, which would have been an amazing opportunity. But I couldn't compromise on those two values, those principles of freedom and doing what's best for children. I just couldn't. I can't describe it. I couldn't. I'm about principle, not party. And I wasn't going to further a lie that the Democratic Party was propagating, that closed schools were not dangerous, that anybody or were not harmful, that the masking of small children, toddlers in diapers made any sense at all. I wasn't going to further that lie. If we do that, if we further lies, we are no better than an authoritarian regime. These things were all propaganda. And people like me were vilified to keep everybody else silent. And I was not going to participate in that.
Jennifer, let's take a pause. When we come back, I want to talk about new studies that have, in a sense, completely vindicated your position. And I want you to talk about those, and we're going to see what now. So we'll be right back.